Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. This is your 2024 Genesis Scottish Open betting preview. We're coming in with a little bit of momentum after 9 out of 10 weeks. We had a top two finish, but no winners. Got to the finish line last week with Davis Thompson at 30-1. I had him both on my outright card and in one and done. So a little double dip for Davis Thompson. And we're out to the Scottish Open. Davis Thompson's in the field at 65-1. But before we get into the outright market, let's go with our best bets. We hear that he's gone missing here in the mainland in the US, but the Hammer Kid is running loose potentially in Scotland. Nick, can you confirm this? And what is your best bet this week at the
It's
Scottish?
happening. It's happening. It's the last Hammer Kid I believe we put on the show, if not the last one that hit. We're going back to Jordan Smith, top 40, plus 140, where ties pay in full.
All right. But Jordan Smith got into the top 40 market at the PGA Championship for you. Great finish for him there. Legendary top 40 hit, actually. And we'll see why Nick's backing him again this week. Before we get to my best bet, Spencer, what's your best bet this week for the Scottish Open?
You're going to have to shop around a little bit for this wager. You can hit me up on Twitter if you want to know more details, but Alexander Bjork plus 150 over Billy Horschel in a matchup.
All right, Bjork over Horschel in a matchup is Spencer's best bet. For my best bet, I'm going into the player finishing positions market on our sponsor, Bet365. Siwoo Kim, you can find him around -110, -115 for top 40s at some places, but I'm going to go with Siwoo Kim to be 60th or better at -120 on Bet365. Before we get into the South Korean, Nick, why are you fancying Jordan Smith's chances in the top 40 market this week?
I think we were just talking about it off air that he has been one of my most profitable golf backers of my golf career or golf betting career. So I'm honestly just riding that, and the form. It's been a little bit of a mixed bag, but he was one of the best ball strikers on the field last week at the BMW International Open. T2 there. I did watch a little bit of that Sunday morning. He had a great chance of winning that tournament. So I'll ride that. His driver distance that we talked about at the PGA Championship, like he was a top 20 driver in distance on the DP World Tour for the last 3 years. And then last year, he kind of started to go by the wayside. And this year, beginning of the season, it was completely gone. Seemed like he was like more of a fairway finder. He's always been an accurate driver, which is great to see, but the distance is coming back in the last three events, which I think is going to be a great advantage here, especially if the conditions are a little bit on the weaker side or the benign side, which it looks like they will. But with Europe, you never really know. So again, kind of bet with caution. I know it's a Hammer Kid, but still, got to caution, got to read the fine print. Other than that, two top 25 finishes here, T12 last year, and that's kind of when I really started to keep my eye on the actually is T22 or in 2022 when he was T24. Is that when Xander won 2022? I think that was
Yeah,
that was the year I really started to keep an eye on Jordan Smith. T12 last year, a cut in 2021, which I believe were very easy conditions. Does anybody have that?
I know the conditions really picked up on Sunday last year.
Yeah. Okay, so
We're
2021 is when Minwoo Lee won, and conditions were pretty easy all 4 days. I think it'll be a little bit more difficult. Looks like the wind will pick up Saturday, and potentially wet and rainy Saturday and Sunday. So I don't think we'll see like an 18 through 22 under winter like we have seen in the past. I think this will be more in like the 12 to 15 range, which seems to be like a scoring range that Jordan Smith should do just fine on. The iron play is solid, not great. Where he lacks is around the green, which I don't think matters a whole lot here. So Jordan Smith, you're getting back on the card, and let's go get it done.
Like Jordan Smith, love the Hammer Kid getting back in action. Spencer, why are you backing Alexander Bjork in this matchup against Billy Horschel?
this is probably one of those rare spots, Roberto, where I'm actually backing a golfer over anything else. It's interesting because I'm lower than consensus on Horschel. I don't want to make it as if I'm trying to play Horschel in any of these markets, but for me, this just comes down to how much my model loved Bjork. We can get into more of that throughout this show. He's going to feature in every single section for me, but I had this a little bit better than a pick'em as the fair price in a matchup. So even if we're looking at around a 50% expected win rate, that's going to give us about a 12.5% implied win probability advantage if my projection in the model ends up being correct. There are reasons that might be too aggressive of a viewpoint, but it is very rare. Like I can't stress how rare it is that we always talk on this show. I'm looking for a 3% edge at a minimum to give some of these plays. And if you look the last couple weeks, we struggled to even get to the 3% mark. And I kind of talked about those bets being lower than that threshold total that I'm looking for. And unfortunately, those were the 2 worst weeks I've had probably the entire year when we've gotten this. It's rare that we get a 12% implied probability advantage. So gonna bet him at plus 150. I put 1.2 units to win 1.8. And that just kind of begins to scratch the surface of what this week looks like for me on the Bjork train. It's going to be all markets, all systems go. And that doesn't mean that this is some free money wager. I don't want anybody to believe that. And we'll talk about that later. But there is an edge in my model that I am willing to back. And when I get these edges, it's a very small risk at the end of the day for a player that I'm much higher on than consensus.
For my best bet this week, guys, I'm going with Sibu Kim minus 120 for 60th or better. I like that this week we're going to a totally different grass on the greens. We're going to, I believe, fescue. It is going to roll around a 9 on the stimp meter, which is significantly slower than what we normally see on the PGA Tour, which is around 11 or 12, with places like Augusta National getting up to a 13, maybe even a 14, if wind allows. Obviously, in Scotland, right on the coast, you're going to have to be a lot slower because Gus will move the balls. And then if the balls are moving, you can't have competition. Anyways, it's a very different putting surface. And I'm going to be targeting some poor putters, at least this season on the PGA Tour. And Siwoo Kim, when you talk about poor putters, he's got to be right in the conversation as an all ball striking team no putt player. And I love that he has great approach play. His irons are always really solid throughout the bag. Really good with his irons. He finds a ton of fairways, although in the outright market, I'm betting on mostly longer golfers. Siwoo Kim is a fairway finder, and he's just really consistent from tee to green. He's also got a great short game. I think that matters this week, but I think you can get away with not being great in typical short game that you play in the US. I think you can use your putter more often sometimes, depending on where you leave yourself. And you can also get creative with like 4 irons and 3 woods from off the green as well. So I think to look at short game this week, you got to be creative or you got to be just really good at a few typical shots. And I think Siwoo Kim kind of fits the mold for both. If his putter cooperates, I think that this is an easy win. However, I just hope that he gets on the right side of the draw. Something always to keep an eye on with golf in Scotland. The weather could absolutely murder half of the draw at some point this week or over the next 8 days or next 8 rounds with the Open Championship next week as well. So be sure to keep an eye on that. Perhaps if there's a matchup bet where somebody's in a different wave compared to somebody else, you could play that or play first round scores or whatever round scores. But I like Siwoo Kim's floor because of his ball striking and tee to green game. If the putter cooperates, I think he's a top 40 lock in this field. I think after the top 30 or so golfers in this field, there's a real drop off with the DP World Tour being significantly weaker than it has been in the past, with the top players on that tour consistently being promoted to the PGA Tour recently. So I like Siwoo Kim's chances of taking advantage of that lack of depth in this field, at least around the 40th to 60th golfer. And so I'm going to be betting him not only for the top 60 or 60th or better at minus 120, but I'll also be betting him at Bet365, where Ty's pay in full at plus 130 for a top 40 bet as well. Really like his floor this week, even though I think that his putter and the lack of driving distance might limit his ceiling just a little bit. Fellas, different golf course this week with the Renaissance Club. They call it Renaissance. It sounds so weird. It's not Renaissance. It is the Renaissance Club. It's not a typical links style course built in 2008 by Tom Doak. But Spencer, how did you model this course this week when you tried to come up with your projections?
You get tricky green complexes. That's going to come into effect on most of these massively oversized locations. That's a quirk that Doak implements quite frequently. You talked about it, though, Roberto, when you were talking about the texture of these greens. You get fescue here. That's a particular surface that makes everything much more challenging. You get this stagnant feel that players are going to experience on their putts. My model picked up on that trend by trying to pinpoint what I called the 3-step process for how a player combined length, putting on similar greens, so anything that's going to be slower in that nature, and then expected proximity for a course that will generate just under 70% of its shots from 150 plus yards. All of that is a very straightforward answer of trying to highlight the main steps for me this week when I'm trying to find success on a course like this. But, it's the answer, the secondary answer that all of us have talked about so far. Like any stop that you're going to get in Europe yearly, a lot of the track's difficulty is going to come down to weather. We can get this as easy as Bernd Wiesberger's 22 under in 2019. Can also get as hard as Xander Schauffele's win 2 years ago when he won it at 7 under par. That's probably more than anything a wait and see answer that takes place for DFS contests. We want every last bit of information out there before locking in decisions. But I weighed my model heavily with that 3-step equation that I talked about. So that's going to look at the proximity from 150 plus yards. 18% of my strokes gained total return came from off the tee. That's that split that heavily favored distance. You will see that being elite with the players that find success in one of those two areas. And that's kind of the game type construction that I'm looking for. But then you're also looking for that third step to where these slower greens, how does a player able to scramble around the surface? I like the point that you made, Roberto, where there's a lot of new factors that go into play. This is not your prototypical around the green sort of course. And I talked about these being larger greens to begin with, but there's an ability to putt from off the surface. That doesn't even necessarily mean with a putter, as you talked about. So you add all of that together. I agree with you, Roberto. I think we get a watered down field at its core. I know that there's a lot of people in the space talking how this is one of the most challenging fields that we have seen all year, but I don't want to take the DP World Tour rankings. And sure, there are a handful of guys that are going to find success here, but I don't want to take those rankings as making this a more challenging contest than a lot of these other tournaments that we've talked about. I still think it's a volatile layout at its very core. And I'm trying to take that route in my build here and understand to where if we want to say it's Xander, Rory, Oberg, and that's the top of the board of what my model thinks has the most projected win equity. If one of those three names does not win, that's where for me, this board really starts to open up. And, there are maybe those 30 names that you talked about. It dips into that Wyndham Clark section, and everybody knows Wyndham Clark and I have quite the relationship together on some of these bets that I've been able to hit on him. And I don't have an outright on him this week. So that could be the regret, but it's players like Wyndham Clark, Robert McIntyre. There are a lot of really intriguing names that carry that distance and putting combination. Can find the right guy that does that for 4 days on a course that is wet right now. I think that's who's going to end up walking out of here victorious.
Yeah, I like the driver putter combo this week. I also thought that around the green, if you are an elite player, I think this type of layout suits you. But if you're not, if you're below average, I'm not too worried about this week. So I think there's kind of a weird pattern there for strokes gain around the green that I'm looking at and just general short game. And then for putting, I'm not afraid to take on some bad putters or putters who might have a chance of performing above their baseline for the season. Also, some of these guys have been off for 3 weeks, so maybe there's a little bit of a reset there. So I'm being a little bit aggressive in the outright market this week with some guys who I think have high upside and can capitalize on the putting change. Nick, anything else you want to add on the Renaissance Club and how you modeled it this week?
No, I mean, maybe a little bit, I guess. I did weigh 3-putt avoidance very heavily. So kind of to pack on everything Spencer said, those mid to long iron play, especially if it's going to be wet, I think the long iron play more importantly. Obviously modeling that based on what they do off the tee. So kind of, it's not a one size fits all course for scoring that way. A little bit of bunker, like sand saves. That's what blew Wyndham Clark way up in my numbers. And now I see Alexander Bjork way up there in the 3-putt avoidance. I think that's a great ticket, Spencer. So maybe you could run that one for me. Any day I could pick on Billy Horschel, I'm down to do it. But overall, kind of right there with Spencer and everything that he mentioned.
I like it. I got one question for you guys. Do you guys know where the word links comes from, or why they describe the golf course as the links?
Is it something to do with sheep?
No, not really.
I'm gonna mute.
Spencer?
No, I'll let you tell us, Roberto.
So the links is a Scottish term for coastal grasslands. It is what connects the beach to the farmlands. And the reason why golf proliferated on this spot is because the sandy soil is not fertile enough for farming. So if there's no practical use for farming and growing food, and it's not the beach, what else are you going to do there but play golf? So that's how golf originated, right there on these coastal areas on the links. And it's an actual term. Fun fact. So without further ado, let's get into our outright cards. Spencer, I got a feeling we're going to talk about Alexander Bjork again.
We are. I'll save that one for the very end. We'll tease it, even though it's already been revealed at this point. But there were two ways I thought you could view this board, at least according to my model. So one would be Xander and Rory graded about as well as anyone has all season regarding projected win equity. We want to have the Xander discussion. I understand I've been higher on him pretty much for 7 consecutive months in the market. I will say that I didn't find the 9-1 totals in the space all that outlandish for him to capture the title. And then 2, before we actually get into the picks, and I mentioned this a second ago, outside of Xander, Rory, and Aberg, thought this board had a ton of issues directly beneath that section. We could argue about what would be a fair price for those 3 names to win. But if Xander, Aberg, or Rory don't capture this title, I thought this became very wide open. So my card has 6 names on it. It's stretching between 18-1 and then this mystery 600-1 golfer, which I don't know who that could possibly be at this point. But Ludvig Aberg is where I started. I got him at 18-1. That has moved more into the 16-1 range. I will say this. The closer that Aberg gets to Xander on the odds board, the more that this would become a stay away or an eventual bet on Xander. Before we started recording, you could still find this at 17-1 at Bet365 in the enhanced market. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Roberto.
Still good.
Perfect. So I think that 17-1 number is very intriguing there, and that is where I would be moving for that ticket. But my model landed in this spot where essentially you had, if we're running this for pure upside, like forget safety for a second. The safety numbers are going to put you in the spot where Rory moves closer to Xander and Aberg moves more into his own little tier there. But for pure upside here, it was Xander, small little gap, Rory and Aberg, pretty much the same exact viewpoint as secondary options. And then there's this range directly beneath them to where I almost preferred a lot of the 40-50-1 golfers, the Bobby Macks, the Matthew Fitzpatricks, the Wyndham Clarks. Not all of those names ended up fitting on my card, and you'll hear the names that I ended up taking instead of those options. But I didn't think there was that big of a difference between a lot of those options and these options that we're talking about in the 20-1 or higher section. And I know Nick has a differing opinion on that, and I'll let him talk about why he likes one of the guys he does, because if we're talking about players that have the ability to putt from off the surface and they're around the green game gets better, I think Nick's guy that he's going to discuss is probably candidate number 1 who sees the improvement there. So we'll use that as the teaser there. But Aberg at 18-1. I took Fitzpatrick at 40-1. I don't think you have to look any further than Fitzpatrick's link style pedigree. 10 career victories, 8 of those wins have come in Europe. I understand that we get this 40-1 number here. I think it's very in line with the recent volatility, but the long-term upside that we've gotten from him on these traditional European style tracks made me think that this was a price that was enhanced because of what we have seen from him recently. So top 7 of my model for weighted scoring, high-end marks for scrambling, total driving, projected putting on similar greens. I thought this was a spot that if this was an American event on a typical American course, and to me, this is more of a borderline links track. Like there's a lot of links quirks that are going to be in every links property that you can't ignore, but I would say this was a little bit of a hybrid, and what Nick was talking about. I don't think this is going to get into that 18-21 under range either. I would say the winner probably lands somewhere between 12 and 17 under, and the closer this pushes to 12 under, the more my model ends up liking Fitzpatrick in this spot. So I took Fitzpatrick at 40-1. I took Sahith Theegala at 66-1. This would be the one error that I made on my card. I grabbed him at 50-1. He has taken money in every credible matchup over the past 24 hours. You You can take that for what it's worth because sharp bettors seem to very much dislike him this week, but I don't necessarily even disagree with that viewpoint when we're talking about head-to-heads here. This is a high ceiling versus low floor sort of route to consider. You look inside of my model, third for weighted off the tee plus approach plus putting, fourth for projected strokes gained total, fourth for weighted scoring, the high-end marks that you would expect for a golfer when we keep talking about distance and putting. Well, the number one player in my model for distance and putting ends up being Wyndham Clark, which that might end up being the mistake with him not being on my card, but the Gala lands inside the top 5 for that category, exactly what you would like to see for this course. Took Tom Hoagie at 125 to 1. That's been more so obliterated in the legal market. You can still find 115 to 1 if you shop around. This is a very, very similar answer for me to the 600 to 1 golfer that we're going to get to in a second, where he checks all the boxes outside of weighted total driving. And the weighted total driving might limit some of the upside potential, but there is this very straightforward path for him at 125 to 1 to use his approach game and this positive trajectory mark that he does have on similar green complexes. So I really like that ticket as a bit of a dart throw there. Took Sam Stevens at 200 to 1. Thought this was a similar profile to Minwoo Lee and Davis Thompson, just at triple, quadruple, 5-6 times, depending on which player we're talking about there. And then, spoiler alert, the player is Alexander Bjork at 600 to 1. Bjork has been extremely solid at this venue in the past. We might be lacking the ultimate high-end finishes from him, but he's been inside the top 42 over the past 4 seasons. My model graded him inside of the top 10 when combining expected off the tee, approach, and putting into one category. It also put him in that same range when you took long iron play and scrambling. And then you look at that high-end mark of 3-putt avoidance. I also ran that in my model, just putting in general on similar green complexes. To me, whether this ends up being right or wrong, this was much more of a 100 to 1 sort of golfer than this 600 to 1 price that got released early on Monday. There are obviously going to be clearer and safer routes to go than betting a 600 to 1 golfer, but I took a swing here to win 30 units. It's a dart throw at the end of the day. It's another one of those low risk, high upside sort of plays. It's 0.05 units. I realize what I'm signing up for on a bet like that. It's tough to win a 600 to 1 ticket. We see it happen so frequently on the space. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen in these spots, but it keeps going back to the original point that I've mentioned a million times here. We don't have Scotty Scheffler. We don't have Tony Finau. You can start mixing and matching all the PGA Tour players that are not here. You lose all the players that are going to be on Live that are not in the tournament this week. And then you supplement that group with a good quality DP World Tour group. But that's more of where Bjork's home is to begin with. So, Bjork was finding a lot of success until he got himself on the PGA Tour early this season, and he face planted early in the year. If you take away that face plant and you keep him over in Europe, or you keep him having success on the Korn Ferry Tour like he was, to me, this is a golfer that would have come in at 125, 150 to 1. So it's a price grab at the end of the day. I'm going to take my shot here. And I mean, that's just, like I said, not the last time you're going to hear about him on this show.
All right, so Spencer is all in on Alexander Bjork. I'll also note that you can find Sam Stevens at 225 to 1 on our sponsor Bet365 right now. So always be sure to shop around, but Bet365's outright numbers are always something you got to check out, in my opinion. Nick, who you got on your outright card this week?
All right, so the guy Spencer was talking about is Victor Hovland. Started my card at 23 to 1. Basically, like I said, with who's I talking about? Jordan Smith and the around the green play. Don't really value that at all here. The long irons is kind of where Victor makes his money, and the driver. 3-putt avoidance looks good, especially on the slower greens. So I'm riding him as my top guy. I really did want to get to Xander Schauffele. He grades as like a 7 to 1 player, but everything in the market now is upper 7s, 8s. Guess you could maybe find a 9 to 1 on Bet365 if you're interested in using that much of your outright exposure on Xander Schauffele. I do think it's his tournament to lose. Loved Ludvig, just couldn't really find any value there in the market. Tommy Fleetwood being 20 to 1 is kind of silly, but it is what it is. Wyndham Clark at 48 to 1. Spencer pretty much talked about him being someone that kind of missed out on his card. I did take a dive on a guy that I had a ton of value on numbers wise, and interested to hear you guys' thoughts when I hang up here. But Matthew Pavone at 100 to 1. I rode Jordan Smith at 170 to 1. And someone that I love a ton, that I had priced at like 77 to 1. So to get this number in the market at 100 to 1, Adam Scott, I think, I don't know. I know he hasn't won a tournament, even top 10 one in a long time, but I just think there's so much game to be had if his ball striking with the irons just is decent, average to the field. I think his putter, especially on the slow greens, and what he can do with the driver, especially at this age, is just damn near impressive. So I think that that's a guy that can win, especially if it's wet and we get some wind on the weekend. I like his odds in a very tough condition on the weekends if that does come to fruition. I wrote a Spencer on Matthew Fitzpatrick. The best number that I could get was 39 to 1. That is still out there, depending on where you live. And I believe that is it. I have room for another 100 to 1 golfer. Right now, it's Rasmus Højgaard that is leading the way. Other than that, I'm looking at not Billy Horschel, kind of like Kurt Kitayama. And then I was looking at Matt Walsh and Victor Perez. But I would love to get your guys' thoughts on Matthew Pavone, because I found he was the most valuable ticket according to my numbers. And that is a guy I have not backed. If not, I have faded most of the year, which has cost me in some spots for sure.
Spencer?
I liked him. My model has had him as a top 25 expected sort of play. The one name I would throw in there, and the number has dropped, it was 125 to 1 that has fallen since, but I would consider Eric Van Rooyen too. This is one of those prototypical tracks for him where I do have a wager on him. We'll get to it in a second. I think maybe if you want to work your way up, there was a price in the market for a top 30 that just did not match the rest of the space. In reality, it's probably even better worked up higher than that as a top 10 or top 20 sort of bet. But it's those sorts of names that I'm trying to throw darts at. And that's where I think a lot of this value ends up landing. But the one thing I just want to add to this before we move forward, and this is why even in reality, like my card might be too overexposed. I am really afraid that this is just Xander's tournament to lose. And with my numbers as strong as they were on him at a price that was really bettable at the end of the day, I didn't want to find myself just throwing dart after dart after dart in that 50 to 125 to 1 range. And we end up here on Sunday and Xander wins by 4. And it's like, well, obviously he did. He's number 1 in my model in pretty much every key category that I looked for. So that would be the one thing I would tell everybody, is just be cautious of your exposure. If you want to build your card differently and you want to be more aggressive at the top with Xander, I'm not going to talk anybody out of that. I think that's a realistic route to consider this week.
Yeah, I think all three of us like Xander more than Rory, and obviously like him more than everybody else in this field.
Absolutely.
If the season ended and Schauffele only has 1 win, although it is a major championship, I think that would be a little disappointing. Although you win a major, you're never disappointed. But I feel like he deserves more than 1 win with the way he's played this year. And he's good enough to be a really good number 1 player in the world in most years. The problem is Scotty Scheffler is having a generational year. So we don't give Xander Schauffele as much credit as he should have. I believe he has 11 top 10 finishes. Nobody else on the PGA Tour has more than 6 outside of that guy, Scotty Scheffler. So he's really been head and shoulders the second best player in the world this year, and good enough to be number 1 in most years. Nick, I like Pavone. I think he's somebody who can gain 8 strokes for the tournament with his putter or with his irons. And I think it's really intriguing. He's played great golf at some of the most difficult courses on the PGA Tour, which really catches my eye. Win, obviously, at Torrey Pines. He tied for 12th at the Masters, 5th at the US Open as well, where he gained strokes throughout the bag. So I think there's a lot to like with Pavone. I think that obviously the driver, him not being super long, is an issue, but he has the goods to make up for it. And unlike an Aaron Rai, who over the last couple Sundays has been a rough watch, he's really shrunk in those big moments. Pavone, I feel like, is somebody who gravitates toward the big moment, and I like that about him. I think he's just a grinder, and I got a lot of respect for his game. Also, Spencer wanted to note Sam Stevens, I think, is a great play. Got to follow him during our feature group coverage a couple weeks ago at the Rocket Mortgage Classic, and when he was going on a run, and so that was really cool. He was putting the lights out. His iron play has been pretty underwhelming for most of the season, but I believe that day was pretty decent. And he smashes the ball off the tee, which he has got to be pound for pound one of the best drivers of the golf ball on the PGA Tour. Probably one of the best that nobody talks about because all the other ones. But his ball speed ranks 35th on the PGA Tour, 39th on the PGA Tour at about 178.5, which is well above the tour average of 173.7. And it's above other golfers like Scotty Scheffler, who's normally been around 177 and change for most of the season. I'm going to update that. But Scheffler is 175 and change, 175.8. It's actually slower than I last checked. But yeah, I like Sam Stevens. I think he's got a lot of upside, and I'm tailing you at 225 to 1 in the outright market on that. Also, Nick, for Adam Scott, we were discussing this earlier before we got on the air, but he seems like somebody like Davis Thompson a couple weeks ago who is above average at everything, or at least has the ability to be the best in the field at just about anything in any given week, but just hasn't put the pieces together for whatever reason. So I love upside plays on Adam Scott, top 20, top 10 outright bet in general. And the bigger the field, I think the better value it's going to have because he can do it. He can do it. So I like those plays. I don't have on my card yet, but I'm going to shop around after we get off the show and see what I can find. But without further ado, get into my outright card. I've got Ludvig Aberg. Been betting him at a lot of the tougher courses on the PGA Tour. Love his combination of what could be generational driving and then also really strong long iron play. I'm all in on Ludvig. He has no weakness in his game. Give me Ludvig Aberg at 17 to 1, which is out there at Bet365. Additionally, I also have a ticket on Justin Thomas at 50 to 1. JT among the top 10 in the PGA Tour in strokes gained approaching the green and strokes gained around the green. Big issue for him last year was his approach play fell off to way below his standard on the PGA Tour. He's perennially been a top 10 approach player. I think that as soon as the putter stops being a huge anchor weighing down the rest of his game, he's going to pop. And I think that taking a chance on him at 50 to 1 on these totally different style greens is my chance to do that. I also think that if the wind picks up, I like his chances with the strong short game and his ability to shape the ball both ways. Ultimately, it was between JT and Wyndham Clark, and I kind of lean toward JT there because I think he has more avenues to win. But if the wind lays down, Wyndham Clark, I think, is a great bet. I just like that JT can move the ball a little bit more rather than Wyndham's big fade potentially getting smacked around by the wind. Moving on to the rest of my card. Spencer, I'm with you on Sahith Theegala, 65 to 1 out there at Bet365. Like his more consistent approach play, like distance off the tee, even though he's not elite, he doesn't have elite length, he's long enough for me. The putter can heat up, and the short game has uncharacteristically been a weakness for him this year, but I'm still bullish on that in the long term. And at 65 to 1, I thought this was a really good number grab. Additionally, Spencer, I thought you kind of nailed it when you talked about the top 3 golfers. I'd say Colin Morikawa is comfortably a 4th best golfer in this field, but looking at the golfers in the 20 to 35 to 1 range, all hard passes to me, who I think should be probably priced closer to 40 to 1. I think, Nick, you mentioned Tommy Fleetwood. Tommy's awesome. He's just not that long, and I think that limits his upside. So 22 to 1 is way too sharp of a price for me on Tommy Fleetwood, although love his game. I'm rooting for Tommy. Finishing out my outright card, this is a real hold your nose play on Max Homa at 75 to 1. He's drifted from around 50 to 1 all the way to 75. I like the little bit of a reset that we're getting with him getting a couple weeks off. He had some really rough showings in the prior weeks before a little break. He was just about dead last at the Charles Schwab Challenge. Poor performance basically everywhere, but tied for 22nd at the Memorial after that. The off the tee play has been uncharacteristically poor over the last few weeks, and he's actually been below the field average in driving distance each of the last 4 tournaments, which makes me wonder if there's some kind of injury there. 2 of those 4 tournaments were on club down courses, so I'm not going to read too much into that. And 2 of those 4 also were 70-man fields where it's all the best players on the PGA Tour. So there's a little bit of selection bias there. But I'm bullish on Homa in the long term. I think if you want to bet him this week, don't bet him for safety, bet him for upside. But he's shown just over the last couple months that he can pop in any of the 4 key strokes gain metrics. And we know with him winning on courses like Riviera and also winning at Wells Fargo at Quail Hollow, he can handle a big boy golf course where you're going to hit a lot of long irons. And I think at 75 to 1, he is a much better golfer than pick your name of golfer in that area of the odds range on Bet365 or anywhere else. So I've got a couple ugly plays with JT and Max Homa, but I like the value for them, and hopefully we can cash in on those guys big time. Or Ludvig Aberg finally gets that win that we've been looking for so far in 2024. And additionally, I said I tailed Sam Stevens 225 to 1. So love Sam Stevens. I also have two outright bets on the opposite field ISCO Championship, formerly known as the Barbasol Championship, out there at Keene Trace in Nicholasville, Kentucky. So without further ado, this is the moment everybody's been waiting for. I'm betting on Ben Silverman and JJ Spawn. Both of them are 35 to 1. I like Ben Silverman as a plotter who can capitalize on strong approach play and then knock in putts with this great putter. The biggest question for his game is off the tee. Is he going to be long enough to contend, take advantage of par fives? And comes in with some really strong approach play over the last 3 weeks and gain strokes throughout the back last week. So I like that as a nice sign. I also like JJ Spawn, who's had a really rough season, but he's also entering with a lot of momentum. He's got hot approach play. His putter's been terrible this year, but he may have turned a corner with gaining strokes the last couple weeks. He also just doesn't have a huge weakness in his game statistically, and top 23 finishes each of the last 2 weeks. So I think he's surging a little bit. I like that he's a winner on the PGA Tour, won at the Valero Texas Open, and it's going to be really interesting to watch the very limited coverage of that tournament, with the two favorites being kids who played in college this year, and Michael Thorbjornsen, PGA Tour U valedictorian, and Luke Lanton, whom had the easiest top 40 bet of the week last week for us. So interested in seeing how those guys do. Luke Lanton's all the way down to 8 to 1 in some places in the outright market. But we won't bore you too much with the ISCO Championship. Fellas, any other plays on the card? Yes, Nick.
All right. I figured I could shuffle something around when I had that open 100 spot. I could just put a little less on Fitzpatrick because that was a pretty heavy ticket. I got a feeling, guys, he grades very well for me, and I know he's kind of been broken, but I love to see the putter wake up the last 2 weeks. If we're talking about long drives and long iron play, it's kind of where he's been above average this year, and usually what we see is the wedge play from him. Jordan Spieth. Would it shock you if this guy makes a run this week? I know Sunday kind of sucked for him. Maybe, I don't know if that, like, he's got so much experience, and no one's going to talk about him. Like, I know he was somewhat in the hunt Sunday, but a lot less media pressure than guys that he's used to being compared to. I have him at 48 to 1, so to see 55 to 1, and I believe that is at Bet365. Kind of want to fire that one up.
We had this discussion coming in of players to look out for the Open Championship that maybe weren't producing the results that we expected. And for me, like, the more I thought about that question, and I gave Jordan Spieth as the answer on the show, the other name that I'd like to at least throw out there, because he's been mentioned, so we'll make this a two-part thing here, is probably Max Homa. I think Roberto's on to something with him. I've always made that if Homa is to win a major, the Open Championship is probably his best chance to get that done. So it's a nice spot for Homa at a price that, I mean, he's a top 15 projected win equity candidate for me in this tournament. And, you know, we're getting him now drifted out into the 75 to 1 sort of range here. So I thought he was an interesting name, but I don't hate the Jordan Spieth call, Nick. Like, it's volatile for all the reasons that we know at the end of the day, but these creative tests around the green, the ability for him, he has been so great off the tee for the past couple of months, and it's just been this short game that's gone south for him. We've seen it turn around in bits and pieces. I think it's an interesting call on your part.
And if there's anybody that is the streakiest player in golf, it's Jordan Spieth. So if he found a little something last week, I mean, one of the first times, let me pull him up again where his player card was. I believe it was the best iron round he's had. U.S. Open was really good, but he couldn't make a putt. But overall, the most strokes gained he has, obviously, if he's finishing T26, man, he disappeared on Sunday. And that's a birdie fest too. So I obviously don't think like the leaderboard will be that volatile Saturday and Sunday. I think guys that have a great Thursday and Friday will probably be in the mix Saturday and Sunday. I don't think we'll see many people just fly up the leaderboards on moving day like we did see at the John Deere Classic. But if anyone's streaky, it is Jordan Spieth, and I feel like I'd rather be on the right side of that at an inflated number compared to the pedigree that we're talking about in Jordan Spieth. I think he's one of my favorite plays now, especially on like the DFS side of thing. I think when we talk about Max Homa, that's probably where I'd go. I don't think I'm ready to bet Max Homa outright yet, but yeah, like Jordan Spieth is in the same price tier as Davis Thompson, which we love Davis Thompson. I want to give the show credit for kind of pumping him up well before I think, anybody outside of Davis Thompson's family would talk about his golf game. So I'll go with that. I think Davis may be a fade, and we just play Jordan Spieth in that range and Max Homa.
I want to note something that Jordan Spieth per round this season on the PGA Tour for a whole tournament, he's gained over 1 shot per round on approach 1 time. Justin Thomas in his last. No. So for the whole tournament, so four strokes.
Oh, okay.
So not came to the U.S. Open. But Justin Thomas has done that 3 of his last 4 starts. So I just think
I like JT too.
The upside for Spieth specifically for me, I like everything except for the approach play. I know he's coming off of one of his better approach weeks, but the lack of form there when he was the best approach player in 2013, 2015, when he was the best golfer in the world.
Right.
And he's lost that. And I know there's a lingering wrist issue, which gives me a little bit of pause, but I don't hate the bet at 55-1. I think this is a great chance to get him where you said the right word. I think it's creativity, and the driver's been awesome. And this is a great track for him. So I like that. I think there's some other guys in that range that I prioritize over him, but especially if in DFS, which is y'all's ball game, if ownership's going to be advantageous for you guys to play Spieth, I think that's a sharp play.
I mean, if you had the same price, I know Davis is a little bit more higher. Even that, would you rather have Davis Thompson for 60 or Jordan Spieth for 55? So that seems to be the market consensus here.
Here's the problem with the question, at least for me. I am
is Davis for real coming over to?
I think you
golf.
I think you are correct with that. To where if you're placing these two in a matchup against one another, I would take Davis Thompson. If I am shooting for the moon for upside, I would probably rather have Jordan Spieth. But I also don't think Davis Thompson is the right example to use here in the comparison. Like, I don't know what player I would go to make the comparison instead, but to me, Davis is the real deal. I don't think he's necessarily going to win, but your point at least checks out to where there's a lot of optimism around Spieth over these next couple weeks. And I think for him to actually have a real chance to win the Open next week, we're going to have to see better than what we've gotten. And so I don't know if he necessarily wins on that. And I would tend to agree with Roberto for making a direct comparison game. I think him and Justin Thomas are very close. They're kind of a coin flip. I might lean in the Justin Thomas direction, but I mean, we're picking and choosing very small margins there. I think Spieth for DFS is one of the more savvy routes to go. I'll just leave it at that.
I'd probably rather bet Spieth in the outright market as well for those reasons, and because, as Nick mentioned as well, Davis Thompson, I don't think has ever played golf across the pond. So I would like to see him get a little bit accustomed to that, but he's on a heater, and he, as we've laid out in this podcast over the last few weeks, is an awesome budding golfer whose best golf is still ahead of him, even though what we saw last week was incredible. So I'm very bullish on Davis Thompson. Felt bad that I didn't use him for my one and done for the Rocket Mortgage when he tied for second. The only way I could be vindicated was if he won last week. He won. So shout out to Davis Thompson. Very proud of you and for cashing that outright ticket. So I'm not necessarily, I'm biased here, but I would still go Jordan Spieth. I'll keep it rolling here, and I'll get into the rest of the card. And actually, before we do that, a quick reminder that this podcast is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary, and that's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. All right, I've got one play from the ISCO Championship. Then I'll get into another one that I think is going to be a popular play. I am fading Michael Kim. He is in a matchup with our boy Mac Meissner. Mac Meissner is -110. Michael Kim is -125. So be sure to shop around, though. It's not on Bet365. But this is a fade of Michael Kim, who earlier today, shout out to Michael Kim, first off. I'm a big fan of Michael Kim, even though he's a Cal Bear. He gives us a lot of access on the PGA Tour, gives player perspective that I think you won't really find anywhere else. And I personally am not satisfied with a lot of the questions that are asked in press conferences following the rounds. Don't know that everybody watches the rounds or knows who the guys are as well as they should. But Michael Kim doesn't wait for people to ask him questions. He just puts great content out there. If you don't follow him on Twitter, I think he's a great follow. Today, he tweeted out, full transparency, I tweaked my upper back / neck and could only putt and chip today. Got some treatment done on it, and we'll have to see how it feels tomorrow. Hopefully, the body will cooperate and heal up quickly. I like this bet for Mac Meissner as somebody who is a safe player, whom the putter is his biggest weakness. That limits his upside in a birdie fest like this week. But Mac Meissner is the better ball striker, and I like targeting him on tougher golf courses. I think he's going to make the cut and be somewhere in the 20 to 40 range. Michael Kim has those issues and isn't nearly the ball striker that Mac Meissner is. I like the fade of Michael Kim, and hopefully we get a Hideki Matsuyama where he plays a couple shots and then just withdraws. Michael Kim, hopefully he's all right. He's also in the Bet365 finishing positions market where you can bet him 43rd or worse. So you can take Mac Meissner out of play if you're not bullish on Mac Meissner. But I think these are interesting ways of betting him. Of course, we want to wish Michael Kim the best and hope that this is just maybe like a short-term stinger that he can recover from, because love to have him around the PGA Tour. Moving on, we are all bullish on Sam Stevens. I think the outright bet at 225 to 1. If you don't love that as your preferred way of betting, if you don't love betting long shots, I think another way to bet him is for top 40. I've got him at plus 200 where ties are paid in full, and top 20 where ties are paid in full as well at plus 550. Just very bullish on him overall as a really strong ball striker. I was talking to you guys about this earlier, where if you play well at the Valero Texas Open, it's a tournament where not all the best players play, given where it is on the calendar being the week before the Masters. But it's a tough golf course. It can be windy, and I think it's a real test of golf that can show that guys are ready to take the next steps at some point, or at least have upside. And I think that has been shown with Akshay Bhatia. We've been bullish on him on the pod this year. And I also believe that this applies to Sam Stevens, who last year at the Valero Texas Open in 2023 was a solo second finisher and gained almost 3.5 strokes per round for the week. So he has upside. I don't think he's the safest play, but at plus 200 and ties paid in full and plus 550 for top 20, I thought there was value there. Anything else I miss on Sam Stevens, guys?
No, I think we've all more or less given the examples, and I'm going to be joining you. So we all are going to have that play. In reality, maybe he doesn't fit the mold as quite as much as the next name I'm going to say. And are those all your plays, Roberto?
Yeah, I also had Siwoo Kim for top 40, but I mentioned that earlier. Wanted to note that he gained strokes putting in his last 2 starts, which hasn't happened all year, which puts me in the dilemma of, can it really happen a third time? Or at the same time, hey, he's more likely now than ever. Maybe figured something out. Maybe he switched to the magic putter. Maybe he found a lab putter out there. I don't think he has. I looked on Getty. But maybe he loses 0.1 strokes and we get the top 42. I don't think he needs to gain strokes to be top 40 here, by the way. I think this is,
I would agree,
more of me being bullish on the price I found in the market and that the field kind of drops off around 30 players. But yeah, that's all my plays.
So I was going to get into my card. So I agree with the Stevens play. You can probably push that a little bit further. You did, Roberto, up the board. The one for me, though, that is more of the boom or bust option is you got to shop around for this. I took Eric Van Rooyen top 30 at plus 225. The rest of the market there was in the 170, 180 range. So it was really a number grab at the end of the day. If you don't have access to that price, I would probably push this more up into a top 10 or a top 20 sort of bet, because I talked about this with you, Roberto, before we filmed the show. This is one of those options where it's high ceiling, low floor, but he has that prerequisite I'm looking for of distance and putting that you can throw it into one category together. And these would be the typical events that you would expect him to find success. So those are 2 of the top 30s and 40s. I have Alexander Bjork plus 240 for a top 40. That's where ties pay in full. You can get plus 250 if you're just looking for the best price you can find in the space over at Bet365. There's a very small discrepancy in value between those two. Don't have a problem if that's the only route that you can get to there at Bet365. I also took them top 20 at plus 750. That's essentially a half of unit spread across those two bets. So they're going to be minimal wagers there. And then the last play that I at least want to talk about here, and we keep calling it the big three of Xander, Rory, and Aberg. But if you really dive into my model, and the reason why Aberg gets included in that mix is just because he has more of a spike potential than a lot of these other names that we're talking about. But if you look at my model over a 2-year running perspective, there are 9 players that are averaging 1 stroke in strokes gained total per round. Of those names, there is a separation where Xander's at 2.1, Rory is at 1.96, and then the third name that I continue to be off of almost every single week is not actually Ober, which is the interesting thing here. It's Colin Morikawa at 1.35. And I understand all the answers everybody's going to give me and all the pushback of why this doesn't make sense. I understand Colin is gaining in all 4 strokes gain metrics consecutive weeks, week in and week out. I have some concerns about the way that he actually fits this venue. And if you take that difference here of Rory being 1.96 and Colin being 1.35, so you have a 0.61 stroke difference in expectation, that's just on any generic course. You move it specifically to this venue with the way that I built my model, and it got a lot closer to 1 stroke of expectation per round that Rory would be better than Colin. I seem to believe in a lot of markets have moved in this direction. There was one book out there that was slow to move. I bet Rory minus 130 over Colin. As everyone knows, I don't normally play these star versus star battles. I just thought this was one of those situations where the public consensus and the public viewpoint around Morikawa has really pushed him closer into that range with Rory and Xander than I think he actually belongs. So I wouldn't say this is so much a fade against Colin as what it seems like on the surface. I would say this is more of a fade of the actual expected difference between these two names and me believing I'm getting a golfer that is expected to be 1 stroke per better round, which is a lot. If you really break this down, it's where Xander and Rory are just so good compared to the field. So if my model ends up being correct with that, minus 130 is far too cheap of a price to be laying. And I think there's reasons why that has drifted out at some sharper books, more in that 160, 165 section.
In pub play.
I like it. I like it. I Spencer laid out, I don't know if we're going to be able to find it, but I'm going to look around as soon as we get off because I thought you laid that out well. The driving distance that Rory has is going to be a big advantage here. And Colin's been really hot with his putter and his short game. And it's just a very different type of green surface and around the green surface. And that might regress here to his more historical averages. So I think that's interesting to check out. Colin also, before he won at Royal St. George's, played in the Scottish Open a couple of years ago, and he said that he just hated how his clubs were interacting with the turf and all this stuff. And then he, of course, won the next week, but had him that week. But I think that there might be some adjustments to be made. And Colin, during one of the more rainy rounds a couple weeks ago, I can't put my finger on exactly which course it was. I think it was the Memorial. Might have been Saturday or Friday, but he was trying to play in between gusts, but when the wind was going on. And so if you find somebody like a Colin Morikawa, who's predominantly a left to right player, I mentioned this earlier with Wyndham Clark, when the wind comes into play, especially at bigger gusts and miles per hour, I think that could be an issue, especially because he's shorter off the tee. But I am very bullish on Morikawa. I'm very interested in seeing how he does this week. And it's not slander to say that Rory McIlroy is a better fit than him on this course. And I thought you laid that out very well, Spencer. Spencer, was that all your plays, or can we sling it to Nick?
Yeah, sling it over to Nick. That's everything I have this week. That's more exposure than I was expecting to get, but matchups kept popping up, and there's a lot of really intriguing top 40 bets, and we've talked about the majority of these names over and over again. Like it's been the Sam Stevens show past my Bjork take that we've had, but there are a lot of players in that general section to where I think the market overcorrected itself. You're looking at a golfer last week in Stevens that was $9,000 in DFS contests, and I know we get a much stronger field this week, but Thompson was only a couple $100 more, and I don't know that we have a massive difference. I've given all the reasons why I like Davis Thompson, and I do like Davis Thompson this week, but like those two, Minwoo Lee, I think they're all very similar in expected finish, and the market is just much higher in some of those spots. And that's not even slander towards Minwoo Lee. It's kind of how I feel about Sam Stevens above anything else.
Nick, who you got on your card? And then we can go to one and done.
Yeah, the only thing different, I'll just make it quick, is obviously Jordan Smith top 40. I rode the Sam Stevens ticket. I also punched a ticket and had decent value, 30 points of value on Adam Scott top 20 at plus 320. Like he gets it done.
Nice.
I don't think he can win, but I do think he's a very live top 10 type of player in this event that no one's talking about.
I like the Scott play. We already touched on that, but we'll get into one and done now. For one and done, 3 people had Davis Thompson in our 15-player pool, including your boy. So I continue to seesaw back and forth with Nick for second place. So I'm back into second, $1 million behind our venerable leader, Michael Leboff. Nick is 900,000 behind me, and Spencer is farther down the board. This week, I think out of every week in one and done, I have not been less excited for my pick or less confident in my pick as this week. I have Wyndham Clark available. I have Victor Hovland available. I'm kind of penciling those 2 guys in for the last 2 weeks at FedEx St. Jude and the BMW Championship. And I have Tom Kim available. I kind of want him at the Wyndham. I don't think that feels going to be super strong. So I kind of am saving him there. I have Fitzpatrick available. I have Sepp Straka. I have Sungjae Im. So I think Sungjae, Fitz are 2 of my candidates. I also have Minwoo Lee. I'm just not normally as bullish on Minwoo Lee as others. So I'm kind of leaning between one of those 3 guys. Maybe I'll go with Fitz. It depends on like the weather. I'm going to be tinkering between those 3 guys. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking this week. Nick, I'll sling it to you. Who you got for one and done?
I was between Fitz and Hovland. I went with Hovland.
Nice. Okay, so we're going to be different. Spencer?
I will say, and this has been, Nick, I know Poston was fine, but Aaron Rye, I did try to help you out a little bit there. That would have been the correct choice. I have 2 one and done contests, and I was telling Roberto this before we started the show. I have $18 million in one of the contests, and I have $6 million in ours. And there's been 5 winners in that contest that I haven't had on ours, and I'm pretty much making the same picks every single week outside of 5 or 6 of those examples. And so I had Davis Thompson last week, and I will say, Nick, you did try to push me in that direction, and that would have been the correct call. I ended up going with JT Poston, which was a mistake myself there. I think I have Wyndham Clark available. I'm just going to be shooting whatever the best player I have that's left because I'm very limited on options. So it'll probably be Wyndham Clark for me, but we'll reconvene. We'll come back for 2025 and we'll try to produce a better result.
Still got a chance in the most made cuts market, I believe. 5%. Get your money back.
Yeah.
All right, fellas, where can we find your work this week? I'll start with you, Spencer.
You can find me on Twitter at @TOffSports. I'll have all my in-tournament information and bets over at Action Network. And then you can get my model over at Rotoballer if you want a more in-depth look on any of these numbers that I've talked about.
Awesome. Nick, where can we find your work this week?
Best bets at Action Network. And then Spencer, I'm thinking tomorrow night for Better Golf Pod will be the Tinker Show right before tee off early Thursday morning in the States. So Wednesday night we will be live on Twitter, YouTube, all that good stuff to talk about the DFS board, and hopefully we don't talk you out of good lineups, or hopefully we do talk you into better ones. So we'll see you then tomorrow night for the last show before lock.
Be sure to get your plays in on time. First tee time is 1 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday morning, midnight for those of us in Central time, even on Wednesday night for any of you West Coasters. So make sure to get your lineups in. You can find me on Twitter or X at Roberto8213. You can check out all of our golf content at the Action Network. I'm our golf editor here, so if you see anything that looks wrong, feel free to roast me on any way you want. We got great content this week. We have Joshua Perry with his global golf picks. That's the article I'll plug this week. He will give out picks on a zillion different tours. So he'll go to the Sunshine Tour, he'll go to the Japan Golf Tour, he'll go anywhere. One of my favorite articles that'll be live on Wednesday morning. You can find everything else from the Olympics to Copa America and the Euros going on right now on Action Network. So be sure to check that out. Thanks again to everyone who makes this podcast possible, especially you, the fans, and our producers, David Payne, Matt Mitchell, and Noah Niederhofer, who gets us across the finish line every week. Thanks again for tuning in. This has been the Links and Locks Scottish Open, Genesis Scottish Open betting preview with a little ISCO Championship sprinkled in. Thanks, and let's hope we make some money this week in North Berwick, Scotland.